Hello, BookTube. It's the 1st of November, and that's day one of NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, when hundreds of thousands of people all over the world come together in order to write 50,000 words towards a novel, either as a first draft or finishing up a work you already have in progress, but one way or another, doing it as opposed to thinking about it or talking about it or planning for it. NaNoWriMo is all about writing, getting the writing done, finally making the time in a schedule that will never just openly permit it to get the writing done. And today is the first day. You have the NaNoWriMo website, you have all sorts of videos, you have all sorts of chat groups and whatnot, and I guarantee that if you Google NaNoWriMo and your town, you will find a gathering of some kind. It is the tentacles of this thing have spread everywhere to try and make the process of writing a little less lonely. Ultimately, it can't be anything but lonely. You're stuck with your own head. You're stuck generating the words yourself, whether you do it on paper or whether you do it, on a screen. But nevertheless, NaNoWriMo is the greatest exponent of the writing community that I have ever experienced, and I urge you all to try it. And the reason why I urge you all to try it, even though it's already started, is because the first week of NaNoWriMo is not too late. Certainly the first day of NaNoWriMo is not too late to get started. You could whip up a story, work it all out, get all the cast and plot and the arc of it all the appurtenances together, and write your 1,667 words today. You could do that today, and then you would be on track, even if you hadn't had any thought about it yesterday. And the reason I know that you can start from scratch in one day and still be on target is because it happened to me. This is now the second time that this has happened to me, where I sailed into NaNoWriMo for a long time, relatively sure of what I was going to do, and then changed my mind at the last minute. In this case, I hadn't sailed in for a very long time. In this case, I was still deciding on what I wanted to write, even as late as last week. But I knew that it was going to be contemporary fiction, so I knew it wouldn't require much in the way of historical research or grounding or anything like that, which cuts down on the prep time, and I knew that, so I just sort of let it hang. And then, relatively at the last minute, last week, I decided that I would do a sequel. That I'd write my first NaNoWriMo sequel to a story that I wrote last summer for the Hot and Sticky Summer Novel Writing Challenge about a boy who lives in Venice who meets a tourist from England, and they fall in love, and they fall in lust. And when that story was over, I didn't intentionally really think that I was leaving it open for a sequel, but of course there is a natural sequel, which is to tell the English boy's story, to tell the other half of the story, and not to tell it in Venice, but to take the story back to England. And that is what I decided to write for NaNoWriMo. Staining That Winter is the name of that story, where young Lord Staining, young Tufton, invites his Venetian friend, Giancarlo, back to England. And where the first 50,000 words was a story of a stranger in Giancarlo's world, now it's a stranger in Tufton's world. And I was going to use the device to test their love, to test their lust, to test their connection, to see if it really is just a fling. And I was all set to go. I was working out all the details of Tufton's family, of their properties, of their attitudes towards him, all the different people in that family. And then at the stroke of midnight, when NaNoWriMo begins, I commenced writing and almost immediately realized I didn't want to do it. Almost immediately I realized, no, it might be a good idea for a story, but it's not the idea I want now at all. It doesn't feel right at all. I got maybe 1,000 words in, and for the second time with a NaNoWriMo project, I got a little ways into the actual writing and thought, no, this isn't going to work at all. I need something completely different. I need something completely different. It happened to me with a previous NaNoWriMo novel called The Ivy Queen, which is about Queen Mary, who during the war was shipped off into the countryside so that she wouldn't be a target in London. and proceeded to make herself a royal, quite literally, a royal pain in the ass to everybody in the town where she went. Not just her rich new host, but also everybody else. And that the Ivy Queen is a story of how she goes from being an obnoxious and insecure fish out of water to being a part of the community. In both directions, affection flowing in both directions. It was a wonderful, warm story to write. I loved it, and I didn't expect to write it. I was fully planning on writing a different story, that NaNoWriMo. And sure enough, 20 past midnight on that night, I suddenly realized that not only what I didn't want to write, but what I did want to write. And I was feverishly rereading all the pertinent parts of all my my Windsor biographies and amassing details. And that happened last night. I started staining that winter and realized that it was a no-go, and immediately knew what I wanted to do. And immediately I got up, and Frida was sort of drowsily following me along while I was looking at the books, trying to hunt out how much I have of what I might need in terms of research. And I didn't let that stop me. I don't intend to let that slow me down. I don't have nearly as much on the particular subject of my new novel as I did on Queen Mary, but I'm not going to let that slow me down, because the whole point of NaNoWriMo is not to slow down. The whole point of NaNoWriMo is just for this 1 month to turn off all the excuses that usually stop you from doing this thing you want to do. And I realized last night, after only a few minutes looking at bookshelves, I realized that hanging up on how much material I have to do research is an excuse. This is just a draft. NaNoWriMo is just a draft. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't even have to be good. It just has to be that you do it. That when the month is over, you have 50,000 words to look at. And you can, believe me, if you've never done it before, believe me, having that done when the month is over, even if it's incomplete, even if it's obviously sloppy, you're going to feel amazing when you have that to look at. And I realized last night when I was feverishly looking around at my books that I shouldn't hang up on the research. I can do the research as I go along. The point is the story. And the story is King Sven Forkbeard, who was a Viking raider, a Viking warlord, and very briefly, King of England. He raided and plundered and raided and bribed and was extremely opportunistic and extremely tactically brilliant, and eventually got what he wanted, which was to be proclaimed King of England on Christmas Day in 1013. And he didn't get to enjoy it long, because 5 weeks later he was dead. And he had a radically different idea of what he wanted to do with his England, as opposed to what any other Viking invader had done, and opposed to what British kings had done. He had a very solid idea of what he wanted to do, and it was very different. And it riled up a lot of antagonism towards him. But even before he became, for 1 month, King of England, he had already led an amazing life. Starting when he was just a kid, just in his 20s, rebelling against his father, who was king, and driving his father off the throne. That really happened, and that was, it definitely didn't happen without bloodshed. And it just kept going from there. He had an amazing life, full of adventures. And I knew right away when I was trying my hardest to write Staining That Winter, complete with the first line. I love first lines. I had a first line. The morning found them brown and entangled. And I had a first chapter all hatched out in my head, and I was halfway done. I was halfway ready. Because one of the things that's really good, a little piece of advice here before I move on with my story, a little piece of NaNoWriMo advice, you have roughly 1,700 words a day to write. If you do 1,700 words a day, you will be ahead of the game by just a bit. And it's a good idea, as much as you can, to stay ahead of the game, because you're going to have days this month where 1,667 words is just impossible. So if you make a nice round 1,700 your goal, another thing that helps conceptually is to make each 1,700 word installment a chapter, so that you are moving your story along day by day. That's a wonderful feeling. That will help you with momentum, and momentum is a really big thing when you hit the dreaded week 2. you'll need as much momentum as you can get your hands on. But anyway, I was halfway through my first chapter, and I knew what it was going to be, and I knew what the story was going to be, and it didn't work. Just didn't work. It might work some other day, but it wasn't time at all for it. So instead, I was feverishly researching the Viking raids on England and the Viking rule of England, and trying to find out how much there is in English on King Svein. And there isn't much. There are all sorts of scholarly papers that I don't know if I have access to. But I know the story I want to tell already. I want to tell a historical novel about King Svein. And I want to do it in the way, not in a straightforward historical novel, but rather in a quasi-mythological tale of the Icelandic sagas. I want to turn King Svein into an Icelandic saga. So that's what I'm doing for NaNoWriMo starting today. I'm doing a story called King Forkbeard's Saga. King Svein's nickname was Forkbeard. If you would ask most English people, most people just in general, if you would ask them, was there ever a king of England named Forkbeard? They'd say no. No, there wasn't, but there was. There was. And I came to the story by a circuitous route. I don't need to bore you with it, but I was briefly involved just recently with wondering about very short reigns of English monarchs. And that put King Forkbeard in my mind, and I had in the back of my mind, down deep in the cellar, I was making it into a story without even realizing it until I actually started writing some other story, and then it demanded precedence. So that's what it's going to get. So I am doing for NaNoWriMo in 2018. I'm doing the saga of King Forkbeard. And I will leave, if I remember, I will leave a link down below to come and find me on NaNoWriMo's website so that we can be writing buddies. I want to hear what you're doing. But the main point of this video, especially in light of my own experience last night, the main point of this video that I wanted to make today is to tell you, to stress to you that it is not too late. If you're looking at all these NaNoWriMo videos that are popping up in your feed and you're thinking, if only I'd prepared, I sure would like to do it, but I'll prepare next year, I promise. You don't have to think that way. It's not too late. The first solid week of NaNoWriMo is not too late. If you do 1,800 words a day for the first week, then you will be all caught up at the end of that week, no matter when in the week you start. So it's not too late. Come up with a story. Block out the rough outline, the rough idea of the characters involved, and write. Write that first chapter. Doesn't matter what it is. Doesn't matter how, like, for instance, this particular story requires lots of research that I haven't done. I'll have to do it as I go along. And I can do it later. I don't have to do it at all. I can just make up stuff for this first draft and put the research in when I'm done, because this is just a draft. That's all. This is just to get you to do it. Get you to do the important parts of writing, which at the beginning are not the stuff being written. The important part is that you set aside the time, that you dedicate the part of your mind to it, that you take it serious enough to actually do it, as opposed to constantly putting it off. That's the important thing that NaNoWriMo teaches. NaNoWriMo absolutely does not bill itself as a way for you to write a finished novel. All they want you to do is do it. Do it. Write a chunk of prose every day towards a goal of one story, and then you can revise it and edit it to your heart's content later on. The important thing is to prioritize the writing and to shut off your inner editor. Another key tenet of NaNoWriMo: don't edit. Don't edit. Don't do that. The minute you start down that path, you will go down that path, and you will start to miss your word counts, and you'll say, I've seen so many NaNoWriMo people do this. They say, well, I'm not going to make my word count for today because I'm revising yesterday, but I want it to be good. I'll make up the word count. And it's more important that it be good than that it be done. And that's fine for other things. But for NaNoWriMo, the goal is to do it. And then to look back at the end of the month and say, I did it. So that's what this video is for. I urge you to keep going or to get started. And also a minor update that everything I've talked about for what I'm writing myself for NaNoWriMo has gone right out the window in favor of a Viking story. So I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. We'll talk about NaNoWriMo many times in this coming month. And I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.